Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, facing the audience questions tonight. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, please welcome our special guest. Thank you. Now, Q&A is live in Eastern Australia on ABC TV, iView and News Radio. Well, the official campaign hasn't started, but last Tuesday's budget launched us on the road to a May election. The government says we're back in the black, but the Q&A audience has some tough questions for the Treasurer. So let's get straight to the first one. It's from Emily Younger.
Good evening. Nearly 3 million taxpayers currently earn under $40,000 per annum, and yet, in your budget, these people will not receive tax cuts while high-income earners will. With the cost of living increasing by 2% in 2017 and continuing to raise, as well as wages remaining stagnant, shouldn't those with lower incomes, including young people, be considered before high-income earners, as they are the ones who would benefit the most from these tax cuts?
Josh Frydenberg, is that true?
Well, we've actually provided in this budget for over 13 million taxpayers, including those under 40,000, lower taxes. And that's through a policy which delivers both immediate relief from cost of living that you referred to, with up to $1,080 in the pockets of people earning up under $126,000 in just 13 weeks' time when they put in their next tax return, but as well as long-term structural reform, where we're going to flatten out and simplify the tax system so that the vast bulk of taxpayers, about 70%, who earn between $45,000 and $200,000, will actually be on a tax bracket of no more than 30 cents.
Now, Josh, we'll come to that part of it, but let's stick with low-income earners at the moment. The question is obviously obliquely referencing Labor's plan, which has an extra $1 billion tax relief for workers earning under $48,000. Basically, I suppose if we can put it in raw political terms, are you offering anywhere near as much to low-income earners? Well,
actually, the Labor Party has rejected the second stage of our tax reform, which would ensure that someone either on $45,000 or indeed under $40,000 and just above the minimum wage would actually be better off under our plan.
Well, Bill Shorten, let's get this straight. I mean, Bill Shorten said, and you can deny it if you like, that in the second phase, workers under $30,000 would only get $5 benefit.
Well, actually, what we're doing is we're lifting the threshold for the 19 cents in the dollar tax bracket from $37,000 today to $45,000, and that's going to benefit these people. But both for those people under $40,000 and those that are on $45,000, you are going to get a better deal under us when our plan is fully implemented. And the key point, Tony, is
how does that work? Because here's the figures. I think one figure we've seen anyway is that workers earning less than $35,000 will get $255 tax relief under your plan, $350 under the Labor plan. That's the tables that have been set out, is that right?
Well, that is right in the short term, but what that doesn't take into account is the changes in 22-23, which we have advocated. Now, our plan is based on helping low and middle income taxpayers. And so if you're a teacher and a trader, you're a couple, and you're both earning $60,000 a year, you will get $2,160 in your pocket in just 13 weeks' time. That's money that will go to the monthly mortgage, to the quarterly energy bill, to the yearly car insurance. And our plan is both immediate relief, because we understand the cost of living pressures, but also the long-term structural reform.
All right, we've got another question on a similar topic. It comes from Alfie Oppie.
Mr Frydenberg, your budget seeks to give Australians earning over $180,000 per year a tax cut of $10,000 per year or more by 2024-25. Can you please explain why high-income earners need this tax break and why this money is better in their bank accounts rather than to social services that benefit all of Australia?
Well, we want all Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. Now, under our plan, when fully rolled out, someone who's on $45,000 will pay 1/10 of the tax of someone on $200,000. And the whole purpose behind our plan is to encourage and incentivise more work so that you don't get caught by bracket creep, which is a real problem. That's why we want a system between $45,000 and $200,000 paying no more than 30 cents in the dollar. We believe that more people in work with lower taxes will create a stronger economy, and the benefit of a stronger economy is not an end in itself, but actually to provide those social services that you talk about, to provide and to guarantee funding for schools and for hospitals.
Okay, the question has his hand up.
So how does the money that actually goes back into these high income earners' bank accounts benefit the rest of Australia?
Well, of course, money that goes into the hands of all taxpayers is money that is spent in the economy and enhances economic activity.
So can I just interrupt there? Is the philosophy that if you give money to wealthy people, they'll put it back in the economy, it'll trickle down to poorer people?
No, the philosophy is that we need to have a progressive tax system, Tony, and that is actually enhanced by the system that we have announced and already legislated a significant part of that tax
plan. When you make it flatter, don't you make it less progressive?
Well, you don't want to confuse what is the effective tax rate and what is the marginal tax rate. So, for example, someone earning $45,000 may come on a 30 cent in the dollar tax rate, but most of their income is going to be below $45,000, so they'll be paying that 19 cents in the dollar. And I think that's really important to understand. But under our tax system, the top 1% of taxpayers currently pay just over 16% of the overall tax burden. That actually goes up to 17% under our reforms. And the top 5% of taxpayers pay around a third of the overall tax burden, and that actually goes up. So we've enhanced the progressive nature of our system.
We're going to have a kind of electoral battle over two tax plans here. Bill Shorten says Labor won't back your flat tax plan because he says it gives retail workers on $35,000 less than $5 a week, while investment bankers would profit more than $11,000 a year. Now, he says that's inequitable, so they won't touch it.
Well, this, unfortunately, is the class 4 warfare rhetoric that you've seen from Bill Shorten, because as NatSem modelling has shown, independent researchers, that the average full-time earner will be about $1,000 or more better off under our plan. Today in the paper was talking about a nurse being $2,000 a year better off under our plan. We've got both immediate relief and long-term structural reform. But when you talk about Bill Shorten and taxes and the Labor Party and taxes, don't think of just income tax, and indeed they do want to put in place a deficit levy, even though they're talking about surpluses, but they've actually got plans for a couple of $100 other billion worth of taxes, whether it's on retirees or on property or superannuation.
We have to keep your answers short so we can get to as many of them as possible, so we'll try and stick to that. But is it true, as reported, that under your tax plan, that's the flat tax plan, those earning between $120,000 and $200,000 will have the income tax liability slashed from 37% to 30%?
We've actually already legislated against the Labor's wishes, but we got it through the Parliament, the abolition of the 37 cents in the dollar. And I think a key point...
But going down to 30% is
correct.
A 7% tax reduction. That's a huge benefit, windfall to high income earners.
Well, actually, it's keeping the progressive nature of our system, but it's tackling bracket creep, and I think that's the important point. But when people get to the ballot box and they decide their choice between the Labor Party and their higher taxes and us and our lower taxes, I want you to bear in mind that Bill Shorten, just a few years ago, actually said that the top rate of tax in Australia above $100,000 should be 30 cents in the dollar. Now, in his budget and reply speech, Tony, he talks about it as a right-wing conspiracy. I mean, he cannot keep a consistent line on this.
OK, we've got another question. It's from Samuel Di Giovanni.
Thanks, Tony. Treasurer, Mr Morrison decided to delay the date of calling the election by a week. Do you think it's fair that taxpayers are paying for free advertising and free air travel for the Prime Minister and his ministers around the country for the Liberal Party? Will you tonight, as Treasurer of the country, tell us the cost of that delay by a week?
Well, there's always been 3 dates that have been heavily speculated in the media, the 11th, the 18th and the 25th, and clearly the 11th is not going to eventuate. But there's no delay and there's no haste. This is the Prime Minister's decision and his alone. Now, you raise the issue of government advertising, and I see the Labor Party has raised that at the 11th hour. The reality is...
Well, I think they've raised it once they've seen how much is being spent.
No,
can you tell us, because you did dodge this question yesterday on the Insiders, how much will be spent in this week?
Well, I can tell you, for example, that all this information about the costs will become public, but the 2017-18 year, which was the last...
Saying after the election?
After the election, but...
But hang on a sec. The Age, for example, today is saying the Morrison government has gained more time to spend at least $5 million on advertising over the week ahead, billing taxpayers for the campaigns. True or false?
Well, as I said, these programs are rolling out and all those numbers will be publicly available. But let me explain some facts.
Do you actually know the answer, or are you just saying you're not going to tell anyone until after the election?
Well, like I said, they're plans that actually are scheduled to roll out. But in the 2017-18 year, because the costs of all these campaigns are actually published by the relevant departments. So, for example, when it was then my department in energy, they published their campaign, which was about $10 million. There was programs for informing people about the immunisation of children. I mean, some of our ads at the moment are about recruitment in the Defence Force, or about educating parents about online safety.
And about your budget initiatives.
Well, they're actually focused on these information programs. But I can tell you one thing, Tony. Yeah. What we will not do, which the Labor Party did, was that we will not run government-paid advertising during the caretaker period. And that is really important for the taxpayer, and we won't repeat Labor's mistake.
Quick question, could the advertising blitz have helped your post-budget news poll?
No, I'm very confident that the reason why the budget has appealed to so many people is because it actually delivers a social dividend to them from the benefit of a strong economy.
But with due respect, that wasn't my question. Could the free advertising have helped?
It's got nothing to do.
Post-budget
it's got nothing to do with advertising. It's got all to do.
Why do you do it then?
Well, because these are information campaigns about recruiting people to the Defence Force, educating parents about online safety, explaining how they can get lower power bills. You would expect that to be the normal course of government. And what the Labor Party did in their last 7 months before the 2013 election is spend $150 million, and we won't be doing that.
OK, the next question comes from Annabelle Rodway.
As an NDIS support coordinator, an allied health postgraduate student, and the very proud sister of a brother with significant intellectual disabilities, I feel I'm fairly well acquainted with the National Disability Insurance Scheme. To me, and many of my peers, it is evident that the so-called slow uptake is due to significant systemic problems, namely the level of self-advocacy that is required for applicants to access the funds that they are entitled to, and the lack of reliable and informed support services to assist them navigating the intricacies of this scheme. Mr. Frydenberg, why are you banking money allocated to the NDIS to engineer a surplus just before an election when you could, in fact, be using the funds to fix the scheme and end the wait for those so desperately in need? OK, well, I really appreciate your question because clearly it is something that people need to know the full story about, so I'll do my very best to explain it to you. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is like and treated in the budget papers just as we do with veterans payments or carers payments or public hospitals. It's based on the number of people in the particular scheme and the demand. So I can tell you that in this budget, the NDIS is fully funded for its rollout over the next decade to the tune of over $140 billion, and the Commonwealth will meet every single cent of its obligation. This is a bipartisan commitment. This is something that my colleagues and the Prime Minister feel enormously passionate about, and we will ensure every resource goes into the NDIS as necessary. Now, the treatment of the underspend is simply because there has been, as you point out, issues in the transition. It is the largest social program that Australia has seen in decades. Currently, there are 250,000 people who are on the NDIS, 78,000 of whom have never received such disability support before. It grows to 460,000 people. And so the treatment in the budget is simply the same way that the Labor Party has treated veterans and carer payments and hospitals. We, in fact, in this budget, had under-predicted a hospital spend by about $1.9 billion. So just as
Josh,
on the NDIS,
I'm going to interrupt you.
I'm
going to interrupt you to go back to the questioner and just because I think your question was very specific, wasn't it? Why couldn't you have used that money to fix the problems?
Yes. Speaking from personal experience with the scheme, I'm very privileged to come from a family where both of my parents and myself have had the privilege to be educated to a tertiary level, and even we had to engage the services of a third party to help us understand the fund and the scheme to get the funding that my brother deserved. And I just think there are so many inequalities in this system because I'm very privileged and my family had the means to do that. But there are so many families in Australia who desperately, desperately need access to this scheme, and they can't advocate for themselves. And that's where the problem is. It's not the lack of funding.
And I hear you.
Josh, so there is a problem with funding because the NDIS staff, the people that are supposed to be helping those people, has been capped. Labor says it will remove the cap because that's creating these impediments. Why didn't you just do that in the budget and use that money to do it?
So there's about 3,000, as I understand it, in the NDIA, and the cap is just above that, about 3,400 or 500. So it actually hasn't met the full numbers within the NDIA. But the total numbers of people who are actually working, I think they're called community coordinators, who work very closely in putting these programs together with the NDIA numbers, total about 10,000 people. And these are the best of intentioned, best skilled people who are working to make this program most effective. So I totally hear what you've said about the issues in the transition, but I want you to understand that every single cent of the NDIS commitment will be met, that 250,000 people on it today are getting the support, and that will grow to 460,000.
Okay, did you use the underspend to help your budget deficit issue?
Well, like I said, there was a lower number of people on the NDIS than was previously expected.
So it did in fact help the deficit?
But in the same way, there were more people who were demanding public hospitals, Tony, that we had to find an extra 1.9 billion.
Okay, I'm going to go back to our questioner. Annabelle, are you convinced by that argument?
With all due respect, Mr. Frydenberg, no. I just think any surplus, so-called surplus, that the government is achieving through this is on the backs of some of the most vulnerable members of our community, and I really don't think that's acceptable.
Okay, we'll take that as a comment. You're watching Q&A Budget Special live from Melbourne. The next question comes from Tom Tomlin.
Thank you, Tony. Treasurer, much has been made in the media about the fact that your surplus is actually a forecast, and currently we are not actually in the black. In numerous interviews since the budget, you've steadfastly refused to admit this. Given you know we're not in surplus, given a majority of the public knows we're not in surplus, and given there are indisputable facts which suggest we are not in surplus, is it reasonable now to consider that Australian federal politics is essentially post-truth?
Well, the reality is on last Tuesday night, I put down the budget for the 2019-2020 year, and that was a surplus of $7.1 billion. Now, what is important is that grows to $11 billion the year after, to $17.8 billion the year after that, and $9.2 billion the year after that. $45 billion worth of surpluses over the forward estimates, and we actually pay off net government debt by 2030.
Josh Frydenberg, the obvious question is the budget in surplus now, or will it be in surplus in a year's time at the next budget?
Well, the numbers that we put out was 2018-19, which was a deficit of just over $4 billion, and that 2019-2020 would be a $7.1 billion surplus.
So we're in deficit now?
Well, 2018-19 is just over the $4 billion, but Tony...
So now, right now, as we speak, as the questioner asked, we are in deficit.
But you've got to understand that the way budgets work is that I presented the budget for 2019-20. Now, which
meant we will be in surplus.
We will be in surplus,
if everything goes well in that year.
Well, can I tell you, and that's a really important point that you raised, is the trajectory that which we have achieved over the nearly 6 years in office to where we are now. And the comparison I've been asked is Wayne Swan announced 4 budget surpluses tonight and they never eventuated. Why isn't it the same? He was expecting a $48 billion turnaround in 1 year, which is equivalent to about 3% of GDP. What we have seen is deficits come down to the point it's just over $4 billion in 18-19, but then surpluses to go up. Now, he was relying on $175 a tonne iron ore. We have iron ore in the budget at $55 a tonne. We're a lot more conservative. We have reduced the rate of spending growth to the lowest of any government in 50 years, about half of what we inherited. But what's really driving the strong economic performance is more people are in work and fewer people are on welfare.
Okay, all right. But you will confirm tonight.
It's not a confirmation. It's about reading the budget papers.
But sure, but we're not in surplus now.
Well,
we're not back in the black now.
We're back in the black. We are.
We will be.
And no, we're back in the black. And I know that might be an inconvenient truth for you, Tony, but the reality is 2019, 2020 is the number that I got up to announce on budget night.
Okay.
The year before you do 18-19, this was 2019-20. This is a budget back in the black and a budget back on track.
Okay, well, we'll let the public work that one out. The next question comes from Izzy McRae-McLeod.
In 2013, the coalition was elected on the back of a so-called debt and deficit disaster. 6 years later, the debt has doubled under your stewardship, and yet somehow we can afford billions of dollars of tax cuts far off into the future. When will the coalition take responsibility for their own period in government?
Well, we're absolutely taking responsibility and very proud of the fact that unemployment is lower than when we came to government, growth is higher than when we came to government, business investment is stronger than when we came to government, and debt, which we inherited, was rising faster than a jet fighter. I mean, now we've brought it under control.
Okay,
can we just
have a few basic figures on the
Sure.
table here? This is from the RMIT ABC fact check. Net debt was $174.5 billion at September 2013, when the coalition took office with Tony Abbott as the Prime Minister, after 6 years of Labor government, that is. In October of last year, after 5 years of coalition government, it was $354.5 billion. So is it true or not true that net debt doubled in the time that the coalition was in office?
The truth is that the debt has increased, but now it is peaked and it is starting to be paid back with the first surplus in more than a decade. That's the reality.
But do you accept the logic that when you say we've now made the first payment on Labor's debt,
Correct.
what you really mean, we've made the first payment on Labor's debt and the coalition's debt, which were roughly the same in similar periods of government?
Tony, what you're failing to understand is when Peter Costello and John Howard left office, there was zero government debt. Okay, so that was all paid back, and it was very, very hard. So we inherited a situation where Labor had turned pristine balance sheets and zero government debt into a situation where government debt was rising and rising rapidly.
But why couldn't you do something about that in 5 years? Because in 5 years it doubled.
Because it takes a really long time to turn the ship around. And we inherited spending growth at around 4%. I mean, that's the reality of budgets, Tony, and we have brought it down to under 2% in rate of spending growth. That is a very substantial achievement. But most importantly of all, and what matters to people in this room...
What is the net debt right now?
It's around 18% of GDP, but it's coming...
What's the figure in billions of dollars?
Well, it's just over $300 billion.
Right.
And
what was it when Labor left office?
And it was less than that, as you say. But the reality is that what we have done is put down now the first payment on Labor's debt. That's the reality.
And your debt.
Well, it's on Labor's debt because when they came to government, there was zero government debt.
Okay, let's move on. The next question is a video. It's from Chris Lehman in Brisbane.
Hi, I'm Chris from Wavell Heights in Brisbane, and I'm an electrical contractor. As much as I'd love to drive a Tesla to work, I don't think it's going to cope with the 700 kilos of ladders, cable, toolboxes, and whatnot that we have to cart around as service businesses. So my question is, isn't this electric vehicle policy that's been announced by Mr. Shorten just an arbitrary thought bubble?
Josh Frydenberg.
Well, I mean, the reality is electric vehicles are coming on stream into our market more than they have in previously, and that's obviously because of the technology and the costs are coming down. But today, electric vehicles are only 0.2% 2% of new vehicle sales, and of the 23 models that are on offer here in Australia, 19 of those are above $60,000. So it's out of the reach of a lot of people.
Do you suspect that that tradesman from Brisbane believes, probably because of what the Prime Minister's been saying, that Labor is going to force him to buy an electric vehicle?
Well, what the Prime Minister has been very clear about, and he's absolutely right about, is that we support people buying electric vehicles. In fact, we have policies that allow that to happen and encourage that to happen. But we want people to have their choice. We don't want them to be forced to give up their car, to take up an electric vehicle because of these arbitrary targets that the Labor Party sets.
OK, let's go to another question. It's on the same subject from John Coleman.
Treasurer, in Europe, there is rapid development and momentum in this area. In Norway, electric cars outsell fossil fuel-powered cars. In Ireland, the increase in new registrations for electric cars has increased by 542% in this year, 2019. You have been publicly reported as saying that to back electric cars would be an economic dividend and good for the climate. So instead of the Prime Minister mocking Labour's electric car policy, will you and your government provide support to their policy to increase the number of electric cars in Australia?
Well, I mean, we actually are doing that, and I'll tell you in a few ways we're doing that.
Can I just tell you one way in which you're not doing it? That's the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister claims Bill Shorten is declaring a war on the weekend when it comes to electric vehicles. He's suggesting that people are going to be forced into owning electric vehicles and they won't be able to take their caravans out into the bush or their four-wheel drives into the bush because they'll be electric and that won't work. But do you really believe that is the Labor policy?
Well, the Labor Party policy is to mandate CO2 emissions for the transport sector, and that is going to force changes in the way people purchase equipment. But in relation to the questioner's points that he raised, we do, through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, support the take-up of electric vehicles in fleets. We do, through ARENA, support the take-up of electric vehicles and through more research. And we are also doing work to try to nationalise the recharging stations because, and this is where the Prime Minister was rightly very critical of Bill Shorten. He didn't even know the details of his own policy. He was asked, how long does it take to charge an electric car? And he said, just basically 8 to 10 minutes, where the reality is, if you do charge it at home, it's 8 to 10 hours.
At the moment. And here's what you said in your opinion piece when you were Minister for Environment and Energy, capitalising on a declining cost curve, new investment in recharging infrastructure and significant improvements in battery capacity will mean the electric car industry has now real momentum in Europe, Asia and North America, and inevitably that will happen here in Australia as well.
And I described it as being very disruptive, like the iPhone is to communications. This is to the transport sector.
Will, what you suggested, does that comprise a war on weekends?
No, what I'm saying in my piece was how technology is changing and how that will become, part of Australian society. But with all these issues about reducing emissions and adapting our energy system, it's about managing the transition in the most cost-effective and sensible way. Too often than not, we get caught out, and I'd accuse Bill Shorten of this, the virtue signalling with these arbitrary targets that actually don't bear out what's going to happen in reality.
So here's another thing you said. The global revolution in electric vehicles is underway, and with the right preparation, planning and policies, Australian consumers are set to be the big beneficiaries.
And we will.
That sounds a little bit like what Bill Shorten is saying.
No. Well, Bill Shorten is, as I said earlier, he's got these mandated CO2 targets, but what I was pointing out there, and it is exactly what the Prime Minister has been saying, is we have to manage this transition and we have to actually work and coordinate between jurisdictions so that if you're wanting to charge your car in New South Wales, it's not a different plug-in type in a different state.
Just a quick one. Which message should voters then believe? Should they believe this is a global revolution that Australians will be big beneficiaries of, which is what you've said, Or should they believe the Prime Minister that having electric cars is a war on weekends?
Well, you would like to contextualise it like that. I would rather say
that's
that
the way it looks.
No, but what I would say is that we need, with electric vehicles, just like with the penetration of renewables increasingly into the grid and a whole series of other changes, we need to sensibly manage this transition to better improve the environment, but also to ensure that people are not out of pocket.
OK, remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, I'm not saying that was one, let us know on Twitter. Keep an eye on the RMIT ABC Fact Check and the Conversation website for the results. The next question comes from Bonnie Purcell.
In your budget address, you emphasise the government's commitment to ensuring that the next generation does not have to pick up the tab for the last. How then do you explain the same government's lack of commitment to renewable energy and ongoing investment in coal? Some would say our ongoing contribution to climate change would constitute intergenerational theft when it comes to the quality of our very country's environment.
Well, climate change is real. We need to accept the advice of our scientists, which we do. We don't debate the science. And we've got to manage the transition in the most cost-effective way. It's not about stopping the transition, because you can't. Actually, there's just a natural momentum with this technology. And if I said to you that under this government, renewables have come into the grid in record amounts, that under us as a government, the emissions intensity of the economy and on a per capita basis is the lowest level in 28 years. We have overseen a substantial change in the grid, both through the work of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and ARENA. We have a National Energy Productivity Plan, which is looking to boost energy productivity by 40% by 2030. And the biggest investment of all in Snowy 2.0 has occurred on our watch, and there was $1.4 billion in the budget. We're also looking to capitalise on the incredible renewable source in Tasmania to help stabilise the grid here in Victoria and on the eastern seaboard of Australia. And there are a lot of things we're doing to ensure we have a cleaner and cheaper energy future.
Quick question about the campaign, and it is reflected in a way in that questioner suggesting that generational theft is an issue. Are you at all concerned that generational lines are being drawn and will be drawn in this campaign, with Labor attempting to appeal to younger voters and the coalition being sort of sidelined by younger voters?
Well, I wouldn't accept the premise of that. When I speak to a lot of younger voters, whether it's about the environment or about their job security or about education, I mean, one of the major pieces in the budget was about apprentices, about creating 80,000 new apprenticeships and a $500 million skills package. We have seen young people get into a job now like never before in terms of numbers. That is the benefit of a strong economy. That is, of course, our core competency, and that is what can deliver a better future for young people.
OK, next question comes from Tim Wilkes.
Treasurer, Labor has no doubt been struggling to manage the public's expectations around the Adani coal mine and its position on that. However, is it not true that you and your Victorian colleagues are having just as much trouble with Adani and also other climate change policies?
No. Obviously, when it comes to Adani, because you asked directly about that, and I've said publicly, and so has the Prime Minister, we'll be guided by the science. And the particular sub-approvals, because the major approvals have already been done by Commonwealth and state governments with 180 very stringent environmental conditions. The sub-approvals are now being guided by the work of Geoscience Australia and CSIRO and others. Now, that's on the desk of the Environment Minister, and obviously, that's a decision that for her to take.
Just on that, and going back to the point about the problems you're having with the Nationals in Queensland in particular, Queensland Liberal Senator James McGrath has threatened to embarrass that same Environment Minister, Melissa Price, for what he calls her deliberate slowdown of the Adani project. Now, what do you say to your Queensland coalition colleagues in terms of unity at this time when you hear remarks like that and you can see how hard they're pushing for the Adani thing to be completed before the election?
Well, obviously, their their support for the Adani mine reflects the strength of the support of many people in Queensland, particularly these regional communities. And I don't think people should underestimate the importance of our resources sector, whether it is in coal or whether it's in iron ore or whether it's zinc or gold or nickel or any of the other things that we have in abundance, uranium.
But sure,
this is
politically,
really important.
are you worried that James McGrath and others may come out publicly and criticise your own Environment Minister for dragging her feet on the Adani project? And what they obviously think is that they're doing that because of fears, political fears in the southern states about that project. No, go right to the point of the question.
So, Tony, I'm very confident, and to the question, I'm very confident that Melissa Price will appropriately manage this issue, as she has done with previous issues, and she's basing her decisions on the advice of the scientists, as they should.
Do you personally want the project to go ahead?
I want Australia to have strong jobs growth, including in resource projects. Now,
do you personally want the Adani mine? This is obviously going out to Queensland right now, and your national coalition colleagues will be listening to what you're saying.
We have already taken those decisions to support the Carmichael mine. But what you won't hear from Scott Morrison and myself, and indeed our other ministerial colleagues, is you won't hear one message to the baristas of Batman and another to the miners of Mackay. You won't hear, and what we've seen from our political opponents on this, Mark Butler say it's not on the national interest for the Carmichael mine to go ahead, but then you've heard Chris Bowen say that it would be sovereign risk if it didn't go ahead, and then you've got Tony Burke saying he doesn't want to make any prejudgments as a possible Environment Minister. I mean, the reality is...
So you're happy, can I just say that you're
issues.
Happy to tell the baristas of Batman that the Adani coal mine is a good idea?
I'm happy to say that we will be guided by the science, and whatever decision the Minister takes, I will support that decision.
OK, all right. Next question comes from Eloisa Moses McMahon.
Mr Frydenberg, as a 16-year-old, I am very aware that the effects of climate change will be most harshly felt by my generation and future generations to come. With just over 10 years until the issue becomes completely irreversible, I am getting fed up with you and your party's inability to take meaningful action. Your budget offers drought relief to farmers who have experienced their worst drought yet. Although this is beneficial to the drought-affected farmers, it does not recognise that the root of the problem lies within climate change. Why do you and your government keep turning a blind eye to the issue of climate change, imposing short-term Band-Aid solutions that will not secure myself and future generations a safe and prosperous world to live in?
Well, it was the coalition government that signed on and ratified the Paris Agreement, which was a global agreement to deal with climate change. Now, the target that we set was 26 to 28% reduction by 2030 on our 2005 levels. Now, we have met and beaten our initial Kyoto target. When we came to government, and in 2013, it was expected that we would miss our 2020 target by 755 million tonnes. We're now on track to beat that by around 300 million tonnes. Now, to put that in perspective for you, 1 million tonnes is the equivalent of taking 300,000 cars off the road. So it's not an insignificant achievement to turn around 1 billion tonnes since coming to government. So we take our environmental commitments seriously. We have implemented significant reforms that has allowed a record amount of renewables to come into the grid. We are setting Australia up for the future with Snowy 2.0, and as well as ensuring Tasmania becomes the battery of the nation with a second interconnector.
Frydenberg, that is a minute, and the questioner has a hand up. Go ahead.
How can you say, sorry, Mr Frydenberg, that you're taking the issue seriously if you have no plan to phase out coal, which is a key contributor to climate change?
Well, we've actually seen 10 coal-fired power stations close in the last 5 to 8 years. So the grid is changing. But when you supplant what is traditionally base load power, and the hydro can be base load, but when you supplant coal with intermittent sources of power, namely wind and solar, you need backup and storage. And one of the challenges I think Australia has failed to meet is sufficient backup and storage, and that's why we're investing in Snowy. So the transition that you speak about is underway, but it has to be managed in the best interests of all Australians. And I want to point one fact out to you.
Okay, Treasurer, be brief because you're 30 seconds
One fact.
earlier.
Well, the people who earn in the bottom 20% of income earners in Australia, they spend 5 times as much of their disposable income on power as those in the top 20% of income earners. So when we look at policies that smooth out the transition for lower power prices, we have to bear in mind the least fortunate members of our community.
Okay, the next question is on a different subject. It's a video. It's from Chris Lynch in Queensland.
Hi Treasurer, my name is Chris Lynch, I'm 32 and I've just been diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma 2 weeks ago. Coming out of my first cycle of chemotherapy, the bills are piling up already despite having top-level private health cover. Bill Shorten's promises of subsidies for cancer patients is looking like it will sway my vote now I'm in the fight of my life. What can the Coalition do to keep my vote at this election?
Well, very moving message. I mean, the reality is there was a number of initiatives in this budget in relation to health, but particularly around cancer. We've listed 6 new drugs on the PBS: skin cancer, lung cancer, bladder, kidney cancer, and I mentioned one, Besponsa, on budget night, which is treating acute leukemia, blood cancer, which means that if somebody would otherwise be paying $130,000 for a course, is now going to pay $6.50 a script.
I'm not trying to deliberately cut you off. We have heard that answer before. And so what he's talking about is out-of-pocket expenses, and that he referenced specifically Labor's policy, which is a $2.3 billion package to relieve the costs of cancer patients.
And Tony, what I'd say to your viewer and to every viewer is that in this budget there was money for free MRI scans for breast cancer. There was money for bowel cancer nurses. There was money for breast cancer nurses. There's the money for the first ever Children's Cancer Hospital in Sydney, and more money for Peter McCallum.
Let me just tell you, to tell you what's going on. Chris Lynch, who sent the questions in hospital, couldn't go on Skype. He's going to text a response, we believe, to your answer. In the meantime, we had another questioner, a cancer sufferer, who was to be in the audience tonight, but she was too sick to come in the end. Her name is Brett Connolly. This is her question. Will the Coalition match Labor's promise regarding cancer funding and potentially better it by expanding it to cover other sufferers of chronic and life-threatening conditions? Well, so in other words, they're wondering if you've still got anything left over in your budget. Could you match this? Because as far as they're concerned, Labor has outbid you.
Well, there's still a lot of detail we don't know about Labor's announcement because they said $2.3 billion, you're right, but then they said there was $1 billion worth of measures that they hadn't yet announced. We, of course, want to see more specialists and oncologists. We, of course, want to see people have fewer out-of-pocket expenses. And we were the ones, not Labor, that actually have listed some 2,000 drugs on the PBS at a cost of $10.5 billion. And when Labor was last in office, they said they couldn't list those drugs because fiscal circumstances didn't permit.
Okay, can you, the obvious question was, can you match Labor's policy offer in this election campaign?
Well, we haven't seen the detail, but what I can say...
When you see the detail, will you attempt to match it?
I'm not going to preempt that. What I'm going to say is that there were, and this is a very serious issue, is that there were a large number of specific cancer initiatives in the budget which Greg Hunt had worked diligently on, which the Prime Minister had strongly supported, which will make a difference to cancer sufferers' lives. OK, well, apparently we have a message from Chris. It's supposed to be on the screen. It isn't quite at the moment, so I have to wait for that to happen. But I think it is coming on the screen now. OK, the drug subsidies are great, but it's the continual follow-up appointments and out-of-pocket charges. I had an out-of-pocket gap of $700 for one pathology test. How can we ensure specialists minimise these huge out-of-pocket costs, even with private health insurance? And these are the issues that we are tackling within our spending envelope. Can you tackle them to the degree that Labor has said they are going to tackle them? That's the question from both that questioner and the other person. And like I said, we want to see further detail, but he wants an answer straight away because he's got a life and death situation here. But of course, we've got a situation where we are already investing significant amounts to deal with cancer treatment, cancer drugs, cancer research. I mean, and that is important for the whole country, and will continue to do so.
Okay, the next question comes from Peter Allen.
Thank you, Tony. Treasurer, recently the Prime Minister made an announcement that your government would cut permanent migration from 190,000 people to 160,000 people per annum to help battle congestion, and then made congestion busting program announcements and projects right around the country. Could this so-called cut be considered a fake cut when your own budget papers shows net overseas migration as being 226,000 in 2019 and 235,000 in 2020? Can you confirm that these figures did not take into account a wide variety of work visas, increased parental visas and bridging visas?
Well, those numbers actually do take into account people who are here studying, for example, and students. That's why the numbers are higher, and the Prime Minister's announcement was around permanent migration. But, I mean, I'm a product of immigration. Probably nearly everyone in this audience is, and I think that's given Australia enormous strength, is our diversity and the fact that we've provided a safe haven for so many people from different parts of the world. There is, however, and we feel it probably more so than most other places in the country here in Melbourne, real pressure on our cities with population growth. So Melbourne's growing by a couple thousand people a week. You go on public transport, and today I was out in Berwick announcing a new car parks for the train station there with Jason Wood, the local member, and Alan Tudge. But the reality is people are finding public transport pressures, they're finding hospitals pressures and education pressures by the number of people. So one of the big announcements in the budget related to fast rail and our vision for the eastern seaboard, particularly of Australia, which includes Melbourne to Geelong, which will halve the travel time, and there's $2 billion in the budget for that.
I'll just quickly go back to our questioner. Are you saying that the cut was a fake cut because there are these other forms of migration?
Yes, I am, Tony, because it obviously, the Prime Minister actually did announce that it was bringing back from 190 to 160. But if you look at the budget papers, it's not 160. It's at least 100 more than that each year for the next 4 years. And then if you look at the projected amount of people in Victoria, it runs about for between 2018 to 2022. It's well over 650,000.
Okay, so a quick response to that.
It's the difference between permanent migration and overseas migration, and one is permanent and the other is visitors.
Okay, let's move on. The next question comes from Chris Fennell.
Given the Liberal Party's position is one of economic conservatism, how does it justify the reopening and immediate closure of the Christmas Island detention facility, which has reportedly cost us $185 million? So how do we as voters meant to trust a government which can make a decision that results in such a large waste of taxpayers' money for what seems to be cheap political points?
Well, the reality is that decision was imposed upon us. We didn't vote for it in the Parliament. The reality is we were against the Medivac legislation because a number of people who have come from Nauru and Manus to get treatment on the mainland, and this was a situation where Karen Phelps and others and the Labor Party produced this legislation and passed it through the Parliament. As a result, we reopened Christmas Island, having closed, more than 17 detention centres as a result of our border protection policies.
You told Barry Cassidy yesterday what we've done by reopening Christmas Island is to send a deterrent to people who would try to game the system. So is that what you're saying now?
Well, very few people have tried under the Medivac legislation to come because they don't want to end up on Christmas Island.
So just to confirm, you were sending a message by reopening it?
Well, the message is that we want people to be processed in the normal way through offshore detention.
Okay, just very briefly, what is the message now that you're committed by your policy to shut the centre down in July?
Correct.
But what's the message of that?
Well, the message is we'll go back to...
That's a welcome mat, is it?
No, the message is we go back to our strong border protection policies that have saved lives at sea and have brought some order to our border protection policies, which completely failed under the
So
Labor Party.
$185 million for a very temporary message that's now been thrown out.
Well, it will be thrown out once we're able to close Christmas Island and pass legislation that overturns what the Medivac legislation has.
All right, you're watching Q&A Budget Special with Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. The next question comes from Stanley Waite.
Hello, Josh. It's the cash people earn and spend that control how well a company and country will perform. So giving a wage that is livable is so important. What is the coalition government going to do to increase the minimum wage for people who are living below the poverty line?
Well, the minimum wage is set, and we believe should be continued to be set by the independent umpire. And we thought the Labor Party believed in that until they jumped around with 5 or 6 different positions. The reality is wages at 2.3% growing over the last year. The minimum wage has been growing at a faster rate than inflation, but also at a faster rate than average wages across the economy. Real minimum wage has gone up under us every year. Under the Labor Party, it actually went backwards.
OK, we've got another question that it pertains to the same thing, really. It's from Robin Monday.
Hi, I'm a single woman, aged 56. I've raised 4 children who are now adults. I chose to be a stay-at-home mother, so I've only worked part-time for the last 30-odd years, meaning I have very little superannuation. My current annual income is less than $40,000 a year, and I've just entered the single woman over 55 demographic, which shows the highest increase in rates of homelessness. What measures are there in the budget to reverse that trend and to assist women of my age who've spent most of their life raising children and now find themselves not able to afford private rent?
Well, I announced in the budget around affordable housing the fact that we have a couple of $1 billion in a housing infrastructure facility to encourage community housing, and that they just had their first bond issuance, and it was very successful. It was oversubscribed. We have a lot of policies to drive affordable housing to help first home buyers get into the market as well. But clearly, in your circumstance, what we are working to do is to keep rents down. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the media about changes to negative gearing. One of the things that will do is drive rents up because it will take investors out of the market, and investors have an expectation of after-tax capital gains, so they charge lower rents than would otherwise be the case. And the numbers are quite stark, like $90 a week in Brisbane or $65 a week in Victoria.
Let me just go back to Robin. Do you have a response to that, and what is it that you want to see happen?
I'm curious whether you've had any contact with the rental market, because I've watched the rents in my area in regional Victoria double in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I, myself as a single woman, if I was looking to rent, could not afford to rent in my town without sharing with someone else. So what I'm asking is, what are you planning to do for anyone over the age of 55 who finds themselves in this situation? Community housing is not something that I ever thought I would need.
Well, there's a combination of responses, both with affordable housing for first home buyers and community housing. There's a number of programs that we're using. We're enabling people to either use their super or to encourage people who are seniors to downsize.
She doesn't have any super, so that's not an issue.
But in terms of getting more housing into the market so that the rental market can be supported, that's the point. We want to get more supply into the market so that the rental market can be supported, so that people like the questioner can actually benefit.
OK, are you happy with that answer?
No. Rents are not going to come down. Rents have been going up, and like most things that go up, they don't come back down. So unless there are specific measures that are going to support those rents to come down, and more houses on the market is not actually going to decrease rents.
You want a quick response to that, or would you just take that as a comment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we're focusing on is driving more affordable housing through a series of community housing measures, as well as of ensuring first home buyers get into the market.
Okay, the next question comes from Dmitry Andreevsky.
Thank you, Tony. Treasurer, we live in an economy where the cost of living pressures compel both parents to work in order to pay the bills and manage the mortgage, and also keep the lights on. What is the government doing to make childcare affordable, not something that means one wage goes to childcare and all we are doing is sending mum to work to pay the childcare provider? As a young family with 2 kids under 4, it would cost us $180 per day after rebate for our kids to attend childcare. Should my wife go back to work? How is this viable or fair for families who are struggling to live on one wage?
Well, we have introduced a number of new measures to subsidise the low and the middle income earners by removing some of the caps that were otherwise on the amount of money that they could receive. So we've fully targeted the low and the middle income earners, and in the most recent CPI numbers, which is inflation and goes to cost of living as well, we've actually seen the childcare prices come down. We want more people to work. And we want, therefore, to give more support, which we are doing through taxpayer-supported schemes.
Okay, are you happy with that answer?
Look, I still believe that it's quite unaffordable.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to working mums to get back into the workforce because the costs are prohibitively expensive, and when you do the sums, it just doesn't add up.
Okay, I mean, are you getting the sense that there are a lot of people hurting out there,
Sure.
And there doesn't seem to be any easy answers for you or for anyone else really to their problems?
Well, I mean, there is definitely pressures on cost of living. There's definitely pressures on population. There are definitely people, and we're sitting here in Melbourne, but if you go around the country, and particularly the flood-ravaged parts of Queensland or the drought-ravaged parts of New South Wales and Queensland as well, and in Victoria, I was with some people from Gippsland just over the weekend, and they were really feeling the pressure. So there are many people in our community that are going through very tough times. My only message for those people is obviously the government stands with you. We've made record amounts of investment to try to get these communities back on their feet, but also that the benefit of a strong economy, whether it's a surplus or the tax cuts or the infrastructure spend or the skills package, that is not an end in itself. It's to get the economy working so they can provide the dividend to the community. Do you get the sense there's a lot of people out there who would trade off tax cuts for services? Well, I think what we want to do is not see them as mutually exclusive, because a strong economy provides and guarantees the services. And you can only get a strong economy when you can incentivise more people into the workforce. And at the end of the day, it's not the government's money, it's the people's money. So we, as Liberals and Nationals, look for every opportunity to return more money into the pocket of Australians. And if a person on $60,000 is not necessarily rich, but if they're getting $1,080 in their pocket in 13 weeks' time, that will be spent at the local business, that will be spent at the childcare centre, that will actually drive jobs in the community. Okay, there's one group that won't be getting any benefit at that point. The next question that's the subject of the next question from Amal Webby.
Australians on Newstart allowance live below the poverty line on about $40 a day. You claim that this is an incentive to get a job, but don't you realise that poverty prevents them from being viable candidates to get a job?
Well, Newstart sees 2/3 of people leave Newstart within 12 months. The fact is that they're going into the job market, and that's where we have provided a great deal of access. Now, there are people who are long-term unemployed, structurally unemployed, and we are focusing additional resources, Tony, whether it's with the job services programs, the changes we're doing there, and a series of other measures. The other point about Newstart is that 99% of people who are on Newstart actually are getting another payment. So they could be getting rent assistance or a parenting payment or a family tax benefit. So it's quite different, let's say, to the age pension or the disability support pension, which could be the primary source of income. Put a counter-argument from an unusual source. After last year's budget, the former Prime Minister, John Howard, came out and said the Newstart allowance should be increased. He said, I was in favour of freezing that when it happened, but I think the freeze has probably gone on too long. Now, he's considered a sage within your party. Why wasn't he listened to? Well, in terms of Newstart, like I said, it's
Arthur Sinodinos, incidentally, his former chief of staff, now senator, told us exactly the same thing.
And I
last
heard
week.
those comments. As I said, it's different to the other payments. I recognise that the people on Newstart are finding it very difficult. But at the same time, our focus has been on getting them into employment, because employment brings dignity, employment brings income, and it can get people on their feet.
Is there any reason why they shouldn't have more dignity while they're seeking a job? Because the argument was they need the money to go out and buy clothes, to travel to those job interviews, and so on and so forth, and what they're currently getting simply isn't enough for many people.
But Tony, what we're doing in a whole series of measures is trying to help those people skill up, prepare for those job interviews, to actually get them into work and strengthen the economy.
Okay, question
so that the jobs
so
are
we'll
there.
go back to the questioner.
I think it's unfair to simply brush it off as being difficult for not being able to find jobs in the job market, because I think today it's proven in the audience that it's actually a threat of losing your house or losing your security. So it's not something as just saying that it's difficult and can be brushed over.
Well, nobody is brushing it over. What we're saying is that the focus is on the job market and strengthening that. The reason Newstart is different to the age pension or the disability support pension is it's not necessarily the only form of income that people have.
So John Howard got that one wrong, did he?
Well, no. I would never criticise John Howard, I can tell you.
Didn't listen to him either. We've got time for one last question. It comes from Sophie Bizzano.
Thank you. With wage stagnation, the price of rent skyrocketing, and no serious investment into renewable energy, why has the government failed to address these issues that are so important to young people in last week's budget?
Well, in fact, there was major investment in ensuring Australia can become a renewable energy powerhouse. I mean, the fact is the $1.4 billion set aside in snowy hydro will help stabilise the system and smooth out the grid as more intermittent renewables come in. Also in the budget was a significant skills package to create 80,000 new apprentices. That's all about driving opportunity in the job market for people. The income tax cuts is about putting more money into people's pockets, reward for effort, and therefore to spend and get economic activity. When you get a tighter labour market, you actually get wages growth. When you get more productivity, for example, the instant asset write-off that we provided for small business, extending that to $30,000, already used by 350,000 small businesses, and small business are the engine room of our economy, that's going to strengthen the economy. So that's the pathway to more jobs, to higher wages and to a cleaner energy future.
Now, I have to tell you, and it's the final thing really, but we've got dozens of questions. We've had dozens of questions from young people along these lines. And I suppose the question is, are you in danger of losing this generation of voters because they simply aren't hearing your message?
Well, our message is about creating jobs and opportunity for them. It's about strengthening the economy. It's ensuring there is intergenerational fairness, not just on issues in relation to the environment, but also issues in relation to debt. We've put the first payment down on Labor's debt. We're proud of this budget and we'll continue to go out and sell it.
Josh Frydenberg, we thank you very much for facing a whole bunch of questions and some very tough ones as well.
Thank you, Tony.
That's democracy in action. We're very glad to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was just about to say give him a huge round of applause, but you did that spontaneously. Thanks to our special guest, Josh Frydenberg. Now, you can continue the discussion on Facebook or at your next barbecue, for that matter. Next week, I'll be away. Virginia Trioli will be in the chair live from Brisbane with Queensland Government Senator James McGrath, Labor frontbencher Terry Butler, Green Senator Larissa Waters. We've also invited a Queensland Senator and One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson. We'll keep you posted on that. Until next Monday's Q&A, good night.